Have you ever looked around and felt that something was out of place, that reality seemed less solid than it should be? This isn't just a fleeting feeling. There's an ancient, profound phenomenon that has echoed through generations and now appears in ways we've never seen before: collective psychosis. But what does this really mean? How can thousands, or even millions, be driven to believe, act, or feel in ways that seem utterly irrational, even absurd? The answer doesn't lie in individual failure, but in the very nature of the collective mind. Gustave Le Bon, one of the first to study crowd behavior, described collective psychosis as almost hypnotic. Individuals, once absorbed into a group, stop thinking independently. They don't simply become a larger number of people. They become part of a greater entity, a mind that pulses with fear, euphoria, or hatred, often wildly and uncontrollably. It's as if each isolated mind were a single drop of water, seemingly insignificant, but when united in a stormy sea, they form waves capable of sweeping away everything in their path. Today, this stormy sea moves faster than Le Bon could have ever imagined. Social media, instant news platforms, algorithms that decide what we see and don't see, all of this transforms our small individual ripples into collective tsunamis. Every like, share, and comment contributes to building a reality that is not just perceived but felt, a reality that pulls us further from what we might call calm rationality. Collective psychosis isn't confined to the media or politics. It infiltrates our relationships, our daily choices, the way we interpret news, even how we react to opposing opinions. Think of the sensation of scrolling through a feed filled with polarized views, alarming headlines, invisible shouts, and accusations. There are moments when it seems like everyone around has lost reason, and in some ways perhaps that's true. But not randomly, there is a pattern, an invisible psychology guiding the crowd. Jung spoke of the collective shadow, that part of ourselves we project onto others, which emerges in group behavior. The shadow is the dark side of the human psyche, fears, frustrations, anxieties, and repressed desires that, when unleashed within a crowd, erupt in ways that often shock us. Alone, we can manage this shadow. In a group, it gains voice, body, and power, becoming almost impossible to contain. But here's the crucial point: being swept away by this tide is not inevitable. Recognizing the existence of patterns, understanding the power of the collective mind, and seeing how contemporary society manipulates our fears and desires are essential steps to avoid being lost. Individual consciousness is the rudder that allows us to navigate this ocean without being swallowed by the current. Yet the unsettling question remains, perhaps even more disturbing, whether the very reality we perceive is, in some way, distorted by this collective psychosis. We live in a world where truth is often fleeting, shaped by those who shout the loudest, share the fastest, or skillfully manipulate collective emotions. Every news story, every viral opinion, every trend becomes a piece of a puzzle that confuses us about what is real and what is manufactured. And what if this tide isn't just external, but also internal? Perhaps collective psychosis reflects our own inner confusion, the chronic anxiety that defines our era, the emptiness we try to fill with instant validation. The crowd is at once a mirror and a machine. It reflects our vulnerabilities while amplifying them. It's a cruel paradox because it reminds us that the madness of the world isn't only out there, it lives within us. Later we'll see that history is filled with episodes where the collective mind became something dangerous, yet revealing. From financial panics to religious hysteria, from waves of fear to extreme social movements, collective psychosis manifests in countless ways, yet with recognizable patterns. And understanding these patterns is the first step toward creating healthy distance, to observe the ocean without being swept away by the current. For now, ask yourself, if the collective mind is so powerful, is there really a way out? If so, how do we find it in a world where everyone seems to have lost reason? In the next chapter, we will dive into the psychological reasons that make us vulnerable to this collective hysteria and uncover what prevents us from thinking clearly amidst the chaos. Because before we can escape the madness of the world, we must understand the madness that lives within each of us. The first question that arises when contemplating collective psychosis is simple, yet unsettling. How can human beings, supposedly rational creatures, be driven to act irrationally en masse? The answer isn't just in others, it lies within ourselves. Within our minds are invisible structures that make us vulnerable to social pressure, fear, and emotional manipulation. Understanding these structures is like peering behind the scenes of our own consciousness and realizing that reason is often just the tip of the iceberg. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, that part of ourselves we deny, repress, or project onto others. Every unacknowledged anxiety, every silent frustration, every fear we refuse to admit consciously finds expression in moments of collective excitement. When individuals gather in groups, these shadows connect, forming an invisible network that amplifies emotions and distorts perceptions. It's as if each of us carries a spark of chaos, and the crowd becomes the wind that turns these sparks into fire. Schopenhauer observed that most people are not guided by reason, but by desire and the will to power. Rational thought exists, but it is often overpowered by primitive impulses: fear of exclusion, the need to belong, envy, anger. In a crowd, these impulses cease to be individual and become collective, making us part of an irrational force far greater than ourselves. And in the modern world, there are elements that make us even more vulnerable. Constant anxiety, the relentless flow of information, online social competition. All of it keeps our minds on permanent alert. Our brains, evolved to survive in small groups and immediate situations, are now bombarded by global stimuli, often conflicting. In this context, reason becomes hard to sustain. We become, almost without realizing it, soldiers in an invisible war waged across feeds, notifications, and headlines. Bauman called our era liquid modernity, a time when everything is fluid, unstable, ephemeral. Certainties dissolve quickly and the fear of not belonging grows. Seeking security, we look for external signals of validation, in others' opinions, in apparent success, or in joining groups that seem to know the truth. It is in this space of uncertainty and emotional fragility that collective psychosis takes root. People are not irrational by nature. They are simply overwhelmed by stimuli, fears, and expectations that no isolated mind could process clearly. What's even more unsettling is that we often don't realize we're being swept along. There's a sense of normalcy: everyone thinks this way, so it must be right. Group pressure creates an illusory comfort zone, a consensus that goes unchallenged because questioning it feels threatening, socially risky. Nietzsche spoke of the masses as an entity that tends to level individuality, dilute critical thinking, and absorb everything into a comfortable consensus, even if that consensus is irrational. Yet there is a crucial insight that offers hope. Individual consciousness still exists even amid collective madness. Recognizing that you too are vulnerable is not a weakness. It is the first step toward creating emotional and mental distance from the collective tide. It's the realization that your mind has limits, but also the capacity to observe, reflect, and decide with clarity. Consider a simple, everyday example. You see an alarming news story on social media, shared by dozens of friends. Fear spreads, anxiety rises, and the automatic reaction is to share it too, to warn others, to comment in outrage. All of this happens in seconds, almost without conscious thought. This is the collective shadow in action, feeding on our need to belong and the pressure to act. But if you pause, breathe, reflect, even for a brief moment, you create a gap, a space between stimulus and response, where reason can still exist. So losing reason is not just an external phenomenon. It is the manifestation of our internal vulnerabilities interacting with external forces. It's the human paradox. We are simultaneously capable of profound rationality and yet prisoners of irrational impulses we cannot always control. Acknowledging this is uncomfortable, but it is also liberating because it gives us the key to avoid being consumed by the madness around us. Later we will explore how technology and social media intensify this phenomenon, turning every human impulse into a mass wave. Understanding why we lose reason is only the beginning. The next step is discovering how the modern world manipulates these vulnerabilities, and how we can protect ourselves without disconnecting from life. We live in an era where information moves faster than we can process it. Every notification, every refreshed feed, every pop-up alert is a spark that can ignite a flame in the collective mind. Social media is not just a tool, it's an endless echo of our emotions and fears, amplified, repeated, distorted. It turns every individual impulse into a wave, every opinion into a potential shout of the crowd. Imagine a mirror that doesn't just reflect your image, but magnifies every tiny flaw, every doubt, every anxiety. That is the effect of social media on our psyche. It doesn't just show reality, it warps it, turning every narrative into something bigger, more urgent, more threatening than it truly is. The algorithm, impersonal and invisible, decides what you see, what you feel, even how you react. It's not conscious malice, it's just math and psychology combined. But the effect is the same. It creates a collective reality saturated with fear, anger, and polarization. We live in a time when everything is unstable, transient, ephemeral, a constant flow that keeps us on edge and prevents our minds from resting. Bauman described our era as liquid modernity, and never has this been clearer than on social media. Friendships, news, opinions, even outrage appear and vanish in seconds. This fluidity creates a sense of perpetual urgency, an emotional state of alert that makes us particularly vulnerable to collective psychosis. There are no anchors, no stability, only the invisible pressure to adapt to an endless stream, where attention and engagement become currencies of psychological survival. Every viral trend, every shared rumor, every digital cancellation is a small test of our collective sanity. And here's the crucial point. We don't need to be foolish to be swept away. We just need to be connected, paying attention, participating in a world that is, in essence, designed to trap us emotionally. It's a subtle trap because feeling isolated against it seems impossible. After all, everyone around us is connected, reacting, sharing, and we feel that invisible pressure too. The effects are profound, not just social but psychological. Studies show that constant exposure to collective opinion and alarming news increases anxiety, depression, and a sense of helplessness. Every share, every like, every approving or disapproving comment is a micro-reinforcement that shapes our beliefs and emotions. And so, the collective mind feeds on itself, growing more intense, more polarized, and increasingly difficult to resist. But here's the nuance. Technology is not the enemy. It is a mirror and amplifier. The problem arises when we remain unaware of its effects on us. When we don't pause to reflect, when we react instinctively, when we confuse engagement with understanding, we become part of the wave instead of observers of the tide. Awareness is the difference between being swept away and navigating with clarity. Pausing before sharing, questioning before believing, reflecting before reacting, these are simple yet powerful acts. They are small gestures that reclaim reason in a world that seems constantly determined to challenge it. It is in this space between stimulus and response that our mental freedom resides, the spark that prevents collective psychosis from consuming us completely. Yet, even with awareness, if we are still influenced, if algorithms keep nudging us forward, an inevitable question arises: how can we protect ourselves from something invisible, omnipresent, and, in a sense, unavoidable? In the next chapter, we will explore historical examples of collective psychosis, showing that despite the speed and reach of the digital age, human patterns remain consistent. Understanding the past can offer valuable clues for navigating the present, and perhaps help us avoid being swallowed by the wave. To understand the collective psychosis of our time, we must look to the past. What we are experiencing didn't emerge out of nowhere. History is full of episodes where the minds of crowds transformed into an almost irrational force, shaping societies, decisions, and destinies. Recognizing these patterns is essential because they reveal that collective psychosis is not a contemporary flaw, it is a profound reflection of the human condition. Consider the financial panics of history. In the 17th century, tulip mania in the Netherlands turned a simple flower into a symbol of collective obsession, driving both the wealthy and the poor to stake fortunes on something that, rationally, had no intrinsic value. Centuries later, we saw similar bubbles in stock markets and technology, where fear, greed, and mutual influence created waves of irrational behavior. Individual logic often vanished when the collective impulse took over. Or consider religious and social hysteria, such as the witch trials in Europe and colonial America. Hundreds, sometimes thousands, were swept up by a fear fueled by collective imagination. What began as individual suspicion became an organized hunt, amplified by social consensus and the pressure to conform. Reason disappeared, replaced by a moral code imposed and shared by the crowd, where questioning seemed impossible, even dangerous. Nietzsche reflected on the tendency of the masses to absorb and level individual thought. He observed that critical thinking is often stifled by the desire to belong, the pressure of conformity, and the force of collective opinion. This dynamic remains unchanged, even in societies that consider themselves modern and rational. The difference today is that the speed and reach of communication magnify every emotional wave, turning rumors and outrage into global phenomena within hours. And this is exactly what we see on social media: ancient patterns repeating themselves with new instruments. Cancel culture, the viral spread of fake news, political and cultural polarization, all follow the same logic that once drove entire communities to irrational behavior. What has changed is the scale and the speed, not the essence. Collective psychosis remains the manifestation of human desires, fears, and anxieties in groups. Recognizing these historical patterns is paradoxically liberating. When we understand that collective psychosis is not random but follows predictable psychological principles, we gain the ability to observe without being fully consumed. It's like learning to swim in a turbulent river. We cannot stop the current, but we can learn to stay afloat, choose where to place our feet, and move our hands in a way that keeps us from being swept away. But there is another crucial lesson. History also shows that the collective mind is not purely destructive. It can be creative, compassionate, capable of remarkable transformations. Social movements, cultural breakthroughs, and peaceful revolutions emerge from the same collective impulse that, at other times, produces panic or violence. What changes is the awareness with which we participate in this collective and the reflection we bring to our individual actions within it. Thus, understanding collective psychosis requires looking both inward and outward, to history, to the present, and to ourselves. Each episode teaches us something about the invisible patterns that shape the minds of the masses, but also about the responsibility to maintain reason and humanity, even when everything around us seems to collapse. In the next chapter, we will explore strategies to protect our minds, ways to resist the pressure of the crowd, to cultivate clarity, balance, and inner freedom. Because recognizing the problem is only the first step. The true question is how to act within it without losing yourself. If collective psychosis is an ocean threatening to sweep us away, then protecting the mind is learning to float, to carve out a margin of freedom within the flow without disconnecting from the world. But this protection is not mere discipline. It is a practice of awareness, attention, and reflection on our own vulnerabilities. The first step is to acknowledge that we are not immune. Each of us carries fears, insecurities, and anxieties that the crowd can amplify. Viktor Frankl, a survivor of the Holocaust, reminds us that even amidst chaos, the ultimate choice remains ours: to find meaning and responsibility in what we do regardless of what surrounds us. This awareness is the anchor that keeps us from being swept away by every wave of collective hysteria. Gabor Maté adds that authenticity is a powerful defense. By connecting deeply with our own feelings, desires, and limits, we learn to distinguish what truly belongs to us from what is imposed by the collective. When we are able to recognize our own shadow, when we admit our fears and frustrations, we stop projecting them automatically onto the world around us. In this way, the collective mind loses some of its power over us. In daily life, this practice takes concrete form. Conscious consumption of information is essential. Carefully choosing what to read, watch, or listen to, limiting time on social media, questioning every narrative presented to us. Pausing before reacting is more than prudence, it is an act of freedom. By creating that space between stimulus and response, we exercise our autonomy, reclaiming reason amidst the chaos. Silence is also a powerful tool. In a world saturated with opinion, noise, and haste, moments of introspection are rare and precious. Meditation, reflective writing, or simply walking without technological distractions allows the mind to process emotions and thoughts without being contaminated by the relentless flow of the collective. It is in this silence that we often find clarity, a vision of our own, independent of others' approval. Another strategy is cultivating deep, intentional connections. Instead of seeking belonging in fleeting, liquid crowds, we nurture meaningful relationships with people who genuinely challenge and support us. The quality of connection replaces the quantity of superficial interactions. It is within this safe space that reason can flourish, far from the pressure of the crowd. But there is an even subtler, deeper step: accepting the human paradox. We cannot control collective behavior, nor eliminate the chaos of the world. At most, we can choose how to react, how to think, and how to position ourselves in relation to it. The true challenge is maintaining inner freedom even when everything around us seems to lose reason. Awareness, authenticity, and reflection become invisible weapons against collective psychosis. Yet an unsettling question arises: even while protecting the mind, cultivating clarity and autonomy, is it enough to find peace and meaning in a world that constantly tests our sanity? The answer is not simple, because it confronts us with the central paradox of human existence: coexisting with irrationality without being consumed by it. It is here that individual freedom faces its deepest test. In the next chapter, we will explore this paradox, reflecting on freedom, reason, and coexistence with collective madness. We will contemplate how to find balance in a world that constantly challenges our minds, without withdrawing from life or the humanity that defines us. The collective mind can be overwhelming, but individual consciousness still exists, fragile, imperfect, yet resilient. Here lies the central paradox. While most are swept along by the current of collective psychosis, we have the capacity to observe, reflect, and decide. It is individual freedom in action, yet a freedom that is constantly tested. Nietzsche reminds us that critical thinking is often suffocated by the masses, and Schopenhauer warns that the irrationality of the collective is stronger than isolated reason. Yet the same mind that makes us vulnerable also allows us to create resistance. The simple act of pausing before reacting, of questioning before accepting, is a silent declaration of autonomy. It is the recognition that we do not need to agree with the world to exist in it, that we do not need to be swept along to belong. Individual freedom, however, is not an isolated refuge. It is lived in the context of the world, amidst human contradictions. Accepting the paradox means acknowledging that even when aware, we are affected by the collective. We are at once observers and participants, critics and vulnerable, rational and emotional. This duality is uncomfortable, yet deeply human. Reflecting on this leads to an essential lesson. Escaping the madness of the world does not mean shutting ourselves off from life, ignoring suffering, or becoming indifferent. It means cultivating clarity, authenticity, and presence while coexisting with the irrationality that surrounds us. It is learning to dance between the collective mind and individual consciousness without being consumed by either. Collective psychosis reminds us of our fragility, but also of the power of reason when consciously cultivated. Every pause, every reflection, every deliberate choice is a silent victory, a declaration that we are not merely part of the flow. We can be the observer who decides, the individual who preserves their mental and emotional integrity. The final paradox is that true freedom does not lie in changing the world or making it more rational, but in not losing ourselves within it. We can coexist with chaos and still find meaning. We can navigate collective madness and remain lucid. We can be surrounded by irrational impulses and yet exercise our own reason. Perhaps, in the end, escaping collective psychosis is less about controlling the world and more about cultivating a conscious, grounded presence. A point of light that does not depend on the external storm. It is accepting that irrationality exists, both outside and within us, without letting it define who we are. And it is in this space between chaos and consciousness that the deepest human freedom resides. So ask yourself as you reflect on everything we've explored, is escaping the madness of the world merely a matter of survival, or is it an opportunity to discover a clarity few dare to seek? Perhaps the answer does not lie in the crowd, but within you, in the silence where reason still breathes, calm even amid the whirlwind. If you've been questioning the world as I do, join me. This channel is for those who refuse easy answers. Subscribe and stay tuned for the next video.